The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, September 16th, Pope Victor III. The young man who was to become pope under the name of Victor III was known in secular life as Daufar and belonged to the Lombard family of the Dukes of Benevento. As the only son, his father was anxious for him to marry and give him grandchildren, but Daufar, whose nobility of soul was greater than that of his birth, felt in his inner self the certainty that he was called to serve God as a monk. In the year 1047, his father lost his life on the battlefield, and Daufar, then in his early 20s, took the opportunity to break away from the family and go to live with a hermit. But his relatives found him, wrestled with him to the point of tearing the habit he was wearing, and in the end forced him to return with them to their home in Benevento. There he was, kept under close surveillance, but after 12 months of confinement, he managed to escape and fled to take refuge in the monastery of La Cava. Finally, his family accepted the irrefutable fact of his vocation and allowed him to fulfill his desires, with the sole condition that he leave the monastery of La Cava to enter the Abbey of St. Sophia in Benevento. Daufar agreed, and upon entering the convent, his new abbot gave him the name of Desiderius. Some years passed without the young monk finding the path he was looking for. He stayed in a monastery on an island in the Adriatic, studied medicine in Salerno, and was a hermit in Abruzzo. By then, however, he had already attracted the favorable attention of Pope St. Leo IX, and around 1054 he made him go to Rome. There he stayed during the reign of Pope Victor II, and there he met the monks of Monte Cassino, who so impressed him that he soon made a pilgrimage to the cradle of the Benedictine order and eventually joined the community. In the year 1057, Pope Stephen summoned Daufar to Rome with the intention of sending him as a delegate to Constantinople. Pope Stephen had been abbot at Monte Cassino and had retained the office upon his election as pontiff, but he was ill at the time, and believing that his death would not be long in coming, he decided that the election of his successor should be held without delay. The vote was unanimous in favor of Daufar, that is, the monk Desiderius. He left anyway for the east to take up his post as papal delegate in Constantinople, but he had hardly arrived in the city of Bari when he was notified of the death of Pope Stephen and had to return. A dispute arose in Rome as to the succession to the throne of St. Peter, and during it Desiderius supported the election of Nicholas II, who assumed the office, but before authorizing Desiderius to return to his monastery of Monte Cassino, he consecrated him a cardinal. Desiderius was one of the great abbots of Monte Cassino, and during his rule, the famous monastery reached the pinnacle of its glory. First, he had the church rebuilt, and then the whole complex of buildings which he arranged on a larger and more convenient scale than St. Petronax and Abbot Allegierno had adopted in restoring the abbey after the sackings and destructions of the Lombards and Saracens. He embellished the basilica in a very special way. He had recourse to influence and money, and not only had the best materials brought from Rome, but hired the most skilled workers from Lombardy, Amalfi, and Constantinople itself. Thanks to this combination of the architectural schools of Lombardy and Byzantium, new forms and motifs of decoration emerged in Monte Cassino, in construction, mosaics, ornaments, paintings, and lighting. The monks of the abbey themselves put their knowledge and skills at the service of the great work. All that magnificence was not a vain exhibitionism, nor had it been made to host hypocritical devotees of external fervor. Virtue among the monks of Monte Cassino grew even more, and their number increased to 200, and Abbot Desiderius insisted and took care that all submitted to the strictest observance of the rule. Among those who were attracted to the monastery was Constantine Africanus, the most notable of the physicians of the ancient school of Salerno and a personal friend of Desiderius. On the other hand, the constructions and decorations gave continuous and well-paid material work to numerous workers, artists, and craftsmen. From then on, the Scriptorium of Cassino was famous for the books that were copied there and for the illuminations and illustrations. In addition to abbot and cardinal, Desiderius was papal vicar for Campania, Apulia, Calabria, and Capua, and the Holy See had so much consideration and confidence in him that it authorized him to appoint prelates for vacant bishoprics and abbeys without a superior. Pope St. Gregory VII very often used Desiderius as his intermediary with the Normans in Italy. Although he was of an opposite type to Gregory because of the gentleness of his character, he always showed himself to be a determined and even energetic defender of the papacy against the ambitions of the emperor. It is quite possible that his name was one of those pronounced by St. Gregory on his deathbed as a possible successor. When the pontiff died, Desiderius hastily fled Rome and took refuge in Monte Cassino to avoid his election. But in the month of May 1086, he was elected by acclamation, and the red pontifical pluvial cape was imposed on him in the church of Santa Lucia to reign under the name of Victor. 4 days later, opposition arose, which gave him the opportunity to flee again to Monte Cassino, where he put aside the pontifical insignia and did not allow himself to be persuaded to take office until Easter of the following year. The see of Rome was then occupied by the anti-pope imposed by the emperor Guibert of Ravenna, Clement III. But the Norman forces managed to remove him from St. Peter's long enough for Victor to be consecrated there. Immediately after his consecration, he left for the monastery. A few weeks later, he returned to Rome for the last time when Countess Matilda of Tuscany was striving to oust Guibert. That pope, so peace-loving and so ill that he could rarely celebrate Mass, was unfit to see his apostolic city turned into a battlefield, and towards the end of the summer he left it for good. After a synod over which he presided in Benevento, he was taken in agony to his monastery. Lying on a pallet in the chapter house, he gave his last instructions to his monks and recommended Eudes, the cardinal bishop of Ostia, to occupy the apostolic see. He died 2 days later, on September 16, 1087. He had been pope for 4 months. The cult of Blessed Victor III was approved by Pope Leo XIII, who added his name to the Roman martyrology.